And go to Genesis 43. Genesis 43, and we're going to be looking today at two chapters, Genesis 43 and 44. And so we have a lot of work to do today. I'm usually a type of preacher who likes to take like two verses at a time. And so this series has been stretching me because we got like chapter by chapter. And today we have two whole chapters that we want to get through and we want to draw God's truth out of. I want to just model something for you. I can't say everything all the time from God's Word. God's Word is so inexhaustible. So I'm going to give you as much as I can from these verses and from these chapters and pray that the Lord would minister to us and strengthen us. We're still in our series in the life of Joseph. And just to let you know where we're headed, next week is the final week in this series. We wrap it all up next week. We're going to tackle 43 and 44 today. And then next week, we really have our work cut out for us. We have chapters 45 all the way to 50. But I think we'll have some important things for us. God has some important things for us in those chapters. So Genesis 43 to 44. Let me just give you, again, a review of where we've been, just in case you're joining us for the first time. On the screen for you, we see that Joseph's life has been, I've referred to it as a roller coaster ride in many ways. And Joseph's life has been this kind of wild journey that's taken him from the pit. We see that. It's taken him to Potiphar's house. It's taken him to prison. And it's taken him ultimately then to the palace. And so we pick up our story here. Joseph's still in the palace. He's been exalted in the land of Egypt, and God has done all of this in His providence. You see that all of these things are according to the providence of God. It's the way God chooses to rule His creation, and it's according to His sovereignty. All of this is done according to God's providence, that He goes from the pit to Potiphar, to prison, to the palace, and now He's in the palace, and He's really in many ways strategically there to accomplish the great redemptive purposes of God. And so today we pick up our story at a critical point. Joseph's brothers last week we saw came to the palace to get food, came to Egypt. Joseph saw them. They didn't recognize him, but he recognized them. And Joseph began to test their hearts to see where these guys are at. He wants to reconcile with them. After all they've done to him, he wants to reconcile with them. He wants to make things right. He loves them. He loves his father, but he had to make sure that a few things are in order. In many ways, we see that continuing in chapter 43, but things begin to get resolved. I want you to know there's two things that we begin to see happening in chapters 43 to 44. We begin to see that Jacob and the brothers begin to lift their eyes off of themselves for the first time in the narrative. And there's great transformation happening. So there's trust and there's transformation happening in these two chapters. And that's the title of this morning's message. It's trust and transformation. And I would believe that I just look at my own life and I know how much I need to grow in trusting the Lord. And let me just warn you, when you hear things like trust the Lord, and when you hear the preacher exhorting you to put your trust in Him, don't tune out, because these things can become very cliche in the Christian church. They can become things that you hear all the time. If you've been in church a long time like I have, you've heard people say this all the time. Just trust God. Just trust the Lord. I want to warn you against letting it become too familiar. I look at my own heart, loved ones, and I see there's so many times that there's areas of my life that I'm really clinging on to, and I'm blind to it so often. I'm clinging on to things in my life that I want to hold on to, that I refuse to trust God with. This is not a lesson we need to learn and then move on from. If I look at myself and I look at the scriptures, I see these are lessons that we need to learn constantly. And today I pray we learn to put our trust in the Lord in a new way, and we begin to understand and see how God in His providence longs to transform us and does that within His sovereign plan and His providence. So we're going to start here with this thought. So if you have a pen, I want you to write this down, and then we're going to jump into the text. In God's providence, God will corner us. Okay? We must learn to trust Him. That's our first thought. That's the first thing that we see taking place in chapter 43. In God's providence, and according to His sovereignty, God will corner us. He'll allow us to be put into a corner sometimes in our lives. You have to understand that, because we must learn to trust Him. Up until now, Jacob, who's the father of Joseph and the brothers. His name is referred to in these chapters as Israel. That's his covenant name, Israel. Jacob has been a terrible father. And what a message to land on Father's Day, that Jacob, we've seen from Genesis 37 till now, has been a terrible father. His sons are murderers. We see that in Genesis 35. Jacob plays favorites. We saw that. That was what led to the demise of Joseph in the beginning. Obviously all under the providence and sovereignty of God. He's very passive, Jacob is. He facilitates this kind of passive dependence in his sons, and this kind of unhealthy dependence in his sons. He operates from a disposition of fear and suspicion. He doesn't trust his own family. He's been a very terrible father. But ultimately, all of this, he's been ultimately failing to trust God. I mean, he's a terrible father. We're seeing him blunder all over the place. But ultimately, what the issue is, he's failed to trust the Lord. And that's the reason he's playing favorites. That's the reason he's keeping things close to him. That's the reason he's guarding his heart from his sons manipulating him. Because he doesn't trust God ultimately. And when we see these things begin to shift, notice now verse 1 to 11. Verse 1 of Genesis 43 says, "Now the famine was severe in the land, and when they had eaten the grain that they had brought from Egypt, the father had said to them, 'Go again, buy us a little food.'" So this makes sense. You remember last week that he sent his sons to go out and get grain, and that's what caused all of the mischief when Joseph saw them. But they went and got grain and brought it back. Where we are now is about almost 2 years after that. You have to remember now too, Simeon is there in the palace. Joseph locked him up. And Joseph sent the brothers, said, "I'm going to give you food, but go back and get Benjamin. I'm going to keep Simeon here. I want to make sure that Benjamin is still alive." Now, they've waited almost 2 years to go back. And now, Jacob, you see his passivity here. What's he doing waiting 2 years before he gets back to Egypt to send his sons to get Simeon? He's letting his son Simeon rot in prison over there. Well, he's passive. But Jacob now, seeing that the food supply is dwindling yet again, almost 2 years later, he says to his sons, "Go again, buy us a little food." But Judah said to him, "The man," speaking of Joseph, "solemnly warned us, saying, 'You shall not see my face unless your brother is with you. If you will send our brother with us, we will go down and buy food. But if you will not send him, we will not go down. For the man said to us, you shall not see my face unless your brother is with you.'" So Jacob's at a crossroads here. He has a decision he has to make. He's in many ways backed into a corner. Judah is speaking some sense to his father in this moment. He's saying, "You want us to go back, but we can't go back without Benjamin." The man, Joseph, they don't know it's Joseph, they're calling him the man. The man said, "If we come back, we have to come back with Benjamin. If we don't go back with Benjamin, there's going to be a problem." And so he's communicating this to Jacob, and Jacob's in a corner. Either they starve to death, or he relinquishes control of Benjamin, the son he loves. In his mind, he's thinking, "I already lost Joseph. I don't want to lose Benjamin." Either Jacob relinquishes control of Benjamin, or they starve to death. He's at a crossroads. Jump now down to verse 11. "Then their father Israel said to them," listen, "If it must be so, then do this. Take some choice fruits of the land in your bags and carry a present down to the man. A little balm, a little honey, gum, myrrh, pistachio nuts, and almonds." This was proper etiquette when approaching an authority figure of some kind. Jacob's saying, okay, if it has to be this way, if there's no other way, and he's saying this reluctantly almost, but he sees the food supply diminishing, he says, all right, take some gifts to this man. This will be proper etiquette in those times for them to bring some gifts. Maybe the gifts will appease him. What you have to see, loved ones, is something that can be very practical for us in our lives. There's a profound truth here. Jacob is backed into a corner here, and he sees no way out of it. And some of you are in that situation. His circumstances look bleak, and he's forced to send Benjamin, the son he loves, the son he wants to hang on to. He's forced to send Benjamin to Egypt. He's forced to do something that he was dead set against. Have you ever been backed into a corner like this? Have you ever been backed into a corner where you were forced to do something? You were forced to make a decision. You didn't want to do it. You were forced to relinquish control. You were forced to surrender something that you did not want to surrender or relinquish. This is the situation that Jacob's in right now. He's in a corner. I think our children feel this way sometimes. If you're a parent in the room, you can maybe relate to this. Dinner is prepared. The table is set. We've worked hard to prepare dinner in my house. My wife has worked hard to prepare the dinner. I'm not really that good a cook. She doesn't let me in the kitchen. But in our case, my wife has worked hard to prepare dinner. And maybe this is familiar to you parents. One or more of your children say, can I have something else? No, mom's worked so hard. She's worked so hard to put it on the table. And they say, can I have something else? And of course, the debate begins. No, you have to be thankful. We worked so hard to prepare this meal for you. You eat this meal that's before you. And the debate goes on. And they say to themselves, well, can I have a sandwich? You say, no, the food is in front of you. This is what we're going to eat. Can I have a banana? No, the food that's in front of you is what you're going to eat. Well, look, can I have some cereal? No cereal. The food is in front of you. Well, can I eat later? I don't eat that. You say, okay, fine. Don't eat. Until dessert comes around. And then they're backed into a corner. Dessert is served on the table. And they say, can I have some dessert? No, you have to eat. No, but I don't want to eat. I want to. And then the debate happens. The debate continues. I'm so hungry. I'm so hungry. I want dessert. No, if you're so hungry, eat with it. And then the debate continues. And the children are backed into a corner. Either they forfeit this beautiful dessert as their mouths are watering and they want this dessert. Either they forfeit that dessert or they eat what's on the table for them. This is just a small way to illustrate how sometimes, in all seriousness now, we can get backed into corners in our lives where we don't want to do something or we don't want to relinquish control of something. We don't trust God enough to relinquish control of something in our lives. And loved ones, this is what I want you to see. Sometimes, even often in God's providence, God will back you into a corner on purpose. God will put you, you have to understand it. This is all under the sovereignty of God. This is all according to His providence. Sometimes God will back you into a corner to teach you what it means to trust Him. And some of us find ourselves in a corner and we're fighting and we're trying to get our way out. We're trying to get our way through our own way. And God has you in that corner and He's saying, will you trust me? Write this down. When backed into a corner, we cannot trust our own circumstances. From an earthly perspective, we can understand why Jacob is struggling here. The sin of favoritism has totally skewed his perspective and his thinking. He has absolutely no trust in his sons to protect Benjamin. He's not going to send Benjamin with them at this point. As far as he's concerned, he's lost Joseph, he's lost Simeon, he doesn't want to lose Benjamin, and he's highly suspicious of his sons, constantly wondering if they're planning something to manipulate him here. His circumstances look very bleak. What's unfolding before him, in his mind, the best thing to do is hang on to Benjamin, but he's in a corner. When you're in a corner, loved ones, you can't put your trust in your circumstances. You can't put your trust in what you see around you. That's going to be a problem. You can't put your trust in what you think is best or what you perceive to be the situation. You can't do that. That's what Jacob starts to do here. He says, I want to keep Benjamin here, but meanwhile, God has backed him into a corner, and he's looking at the food supply. It's dwindling, and he's in a corner. He has to make a decision. What is he to do? Well, he can't put his trust in his circumstances. Now, John Piper wrote this. It's on the screen for you. Many of the greatest gifts and deepest joys that God gives us come wrapped in painful packages. You have to understand that the story of Joseph is a story of sovereignty and providence. It's a story of a much grander purpose than just Joseph's life and Jacob's life and the family's life. A lot more is happening here. You have to remember that God is orchestrating all of these events to accomplish his purpose. And as Jacob is backed into a corner according to God's sovereignty, it would be a bad plan, and he begins to do this, to begin to look at his circumstances and base his decisions on that. We do that often. That's why God has to press us into a corner sometimes. You have no choice but to trust me. You have no other alternative but to trust. What are you going to do, Jacob? What are you going to do? You want both ways? You want to eat and you want to hold on to Benjamin? What are you going to do? You have to choose one thing, and you have to choose to trust the Lord. Loved ones, we do this often. We trust in our circumstances. We look around, we see this is happening, this is happening, this is happening. We do this a lot. All of us, without even thinking. We're blind to this. And we construct for ourselves a sovereign plan. But the problem is we're not sovereign. And the problem is we have no idea the beginning from the end, but God does. That's why it's a very bad plan to trust in your own circumstances. You say, well, I know a lot. I know a lot of the situation. I understand what's happening here. You don't. You don't. Jacob thinks he does, but he does not. And as he begins to relinquish control slowly in this narrative, no doubt, he needs to place his eyes somewhere other than himself and his circumstances to find hope. So, when backed into a corner, we can't trust in our circumstances. Secondly, when backed into a corner, we must trust the Lord. Now, here's the cliche phrase. Here's the thing you've been hearing in church, if you've been in church all your life. Here's the thing you're tired of hearing because you keep hearing it and you're just like, I don't even know what that means anymore. That we must trust the Lord. Well, in this situation, it means that Jacob has to understand there's someone else that's in control, and he has to relinquish something that's so dear and valuable and precious to him because he trusts that God will do something in it. God will take care of it. Now, this is the challenging part that we face in our lives so often. Something very precious to you, something very valuable to you is being demanded of you, and you hold on to it. And you hold on to it, and you establish your own sovereign plan. I'll figure out a way to hold on to this. But you have to understand now, Jacob can't do that because God has put him in a corner. If you hold on to Benjamin, you starve to death. What's it going to be? You have to trust me. And so we must trust the Lord. Notice verses 13 to 14 now. Jacob says, take also your brother and arise again and go to the man. So something's changing. Jacob is now allowing the thing that he was dead set against, the release of Benjamin. And then he says, may God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, Joseph, and may he send back your brother, Simeon, and Benjamin. And as for me, if I am bereaved of my children, I am bereaved. Backed into a corner by God, according to God's sovereignty, in God's providence, Jacob releases Benjamin to go with his brothers. Now, you have to remember God's big redemptive purpose here. God's goal here is to get Joseph's entire family to Egypt. So God backs him into a corner. He's got to get them one by one. They're all going to get to Egypt. They all got to get there. Notice on the screen for you, Genesis 15, 13 to 14. Let me remind you. When God made his covenant with Abram, he said this. Know for certain that your offspring, excuse me, will be sojourners in a land that is not theirs, and will be servants there, and they will be afflicted for 400 years. But I will bring judgment on the nation that they serve, and afterward they will come out with great possessions. God's people must get to Egypt. It's going to happen. Jacob may be dead set against it or not. It's going to happen. They're going to be sojourners in a land that's not their own. They're going to suffer affliction for 400 years after they multiply and grow. And then they're going to be delivered from bondage, the bondage of the Egyptians, in the event called the Exodus. And you have to remember now the way God gets his people to Egypt is through Joseph, and specifically through this family. This family has to land in Egypt. So
You got to understand this in the grand scheme of things. Jacob's standing there. I'm not letting Benjamin go. I'm not letting him go. God backs him into a corner and says, are you going to trust me? And now you see, providentially, God's plan begin to unfold, because now Jacob begins to lift his eyes and begins to trust a little bit and release Benjamin, because he's been forced into a corner. Now, Simeon's already there. The 10 brothers plus Benjamin are going to get there. Jacob's eventually going to get there. You see now God's plan unfolding, but it cannot unfold without Jacob being backed into a corner in order to place his trust in God. And for the first time in the narrative, Jacob is seen trusting in the Lord. You say, now, how do you know this? He's reluctant. How do you know that he's trusting the Lord? Maybe he's just really doesn't want to starve to death and he's being forced to do this. Where we get glimpses, though, that he's trusting the Lord in this moment. Write this down. We must trust the Lord. Why exactly? Write this down. Because when we are weak, he is almighty. Okay? He is almighty. Notice verse 14, and this is what I want you to see. Jacob, reluctant Jacob, Jacob that's holding on to Benjamin, says this now in verse 14. He says, may God Almighty grant you mercy before the man, and may he send back your other brother and Benjamin. What he's saying is, I have to believe that there's a God Almighty, our God, that he will grant you mercy, that he will grant you favor, that he will send the brothers back, that everything's going to be okay. For the first time, Jacob lifts his eyes up and he says to the brothers, take Benjamin, and may God Almighty, in the Hebrew it's El Shaddai. El Shaddai. He's acknowledging that there is one who is omnipotent. He's acknowledging that there is one that is all-powerful and almighty in this moment in verse 14. And he says, may El Shaddai, may God Almighty take care of you. When we are weak, he is almighty. This is what Jacob is beginning to feel right now. In his weakness, backed into a corner with no other choice to make, he places his trust in El Shaddai, Almighty, the omnipotent one. And he opens his grip and he releases that which is so valuable to him, Benjamin. And he sends him with the brothers. No doubt he is very weak as he does this, but he must trust because God is El Shaddai. God is Almighty. Now, what will get you and I to the posture of trust in our lives? What will get you and I to the position where the thing we're hanging on to, the dream that we have that we won't let go of, the thing that we don't want to do that we have to do, that thing, that moment of obedience that we have to take, that we're refusing to take, what will get us to the moment of trust, even though we know that in the short term it's going to cause us great pain? What will get us to that point of trust? Well, it's understanding that when we are weak, he is El Shaddai. He is almighty. He is omnipotent. You think God can't take care of this? You think God's not going to take care? But if I let go of this thing, if I obey in this way, if I do the thing that I know I'm supposed to do, then I'm going to be hurt. It's going to be painful. Things aren't going to go well. You don't think God will take care of you? Do you think the God, the creator of the universe, will just leave you alone? You think he's just going to abandon you and kick you to the curb? You don't believe that God Almighty, the omnipotent one, El Shaddai, the one who created all things and who sustains all things by the word of his power, is not capable enough or loving enough to take care of you? You say, no, Jason, I believe it, but I'm just struggling. Okay. But if you really believe, if I really believe that he is almighty, then I must trust him. And so that's what essentially pries open his fingers. God has backed him into a corner, and he has no other choice but to trust God. Some of you are in that situation, or you've been in that situation. And some of you, it's like the corner, you're really squashed in that corner because God is pressing you into that corner, and you're fighting it. I'm just telling you, some of you are fighting it, but God has pressed you into that corner, and in his providence, he's saying, you will stay in this corner until you learn to trust me. You have no other choice right now. Nothing in you can solve this. Nothing in you can get your way out of this. You have no other choice. You have to trust me. And some of us, it takes a long time. It takes a lot of pressing. It takes a lot of squeezing. It takes a lot of pain in that corner to really get to that place where we wake up and realize what it is that God is doing in our lives. Could it be that you're in a corner today? In a corner by God's design, so that you would finally take your eyes off of your circumstances, so you can finally stop trying to figure it out. Stop trying to figure out how to keep the thing that's so precious to you when you know you need to relinquish it to the Lord. Try to find out how to make sure you don't have to take that step of obedience. It'll be so painful, so hard. I'll find another way. I'll find a spiritual way. I'll find another way, a loophole in the Bible somehow. Listen, there's no loopholes. Sometimes, loved ones, often, in God's sovereignty and His loving providence, He backs you into a corner, and you have no other choice but to trust Him and to obey. I wonder if there's anyone in this situation today who needs to stop and say, I'm weak and I need to draw on the strength of the Almighty El Shaddai. When we are weak, He is almighty. Second reason we should trust God. We must trust in the Lord. Why? Because when we are afraid, He is our peace. Okay? When we are afraid, He is our peace. I'm going to show you in the text in a moment, but we have to just get real here for a second. Some of us live in a perpetual state of fear, and maybe we don't even realize it. Maybe you've learned to live in just this chronic state of fear. Fear is a crippling thing. Some of us in this room, if we're honest with ourselves, we're afraid. We're afraid of the economy. We're afraid of politics. We're afraid of financial uncertainty. We're afraid of funerals. We're afraid of weddings. We're afraid of natural disasters. We're afraid of everything. There's no peace in our hearts. Joseph's brothers arrive back in Egypt with Benjamin. And Joseph summons them to his house. But they don't know why, and they are terrified. Let me show you. Verses 15 to 23. They arose and went down to Egypt and stood before Joseph. When Joseph saw Benjamin with them, he said to the steward of the house, bring the men into the house and slaughter an animal and make ready, for the men are to dine with me at noon. He wants to celebrate, he wants to give them a feast. They don't know this though. The man did as Joseph told him, and brought the men to Joseph's house. Now, verse 18. And the men, the brothers, were afraid because they were brought to Joseph's house. And they said, it is because of the money which was replaced in our sacks the first time that we were brought in, so that he may assault us and fall upon us to make us servants and seize our donkeys. They're terrified. They don't know that Joseph is calling them in to prepare a meal for them, to eat with them. They just hear that Joseph's calling them into his house. And they don't know it's Joseph, remember. And they're terrified. They think, man, it's because the money that was in our sacks. Remember, Joseph had planted that in their money, in their sacks, excuse me. He's going to make us his servant. He's going to enslave us. They're terrified. Verse 19. So they went up to the steward of Joseph's house and spoke with him at the door of the house and said, oh, my lord, we came down the first time to buy food. They stood to beg here. And we came to the lodging place and we opened our sacks, and each man's money was in the mouth of his sack, the money in full weight. So we have brought it again with us. And we have brought other money with us to buy food. We do not know who put our money in our sacks. Now watch this now. Very strange moment. Verse 23. He replied, this Egyptian steward of Joseph's house, he replied, peace to you. In the Hebrew, it's shalom. Peace to you. Do not be afraid. Listen, your God and the God of your father has put treasure in your sacks for you. I received your money. Then he brought Simeon out to them. This is a very interesting moment, a little bit strange. This Egyptian steward of Joseph's house comes to them. They're terrified. They're like, please, please, we didn't steal the money. It's not our fault. Please, don't bring us into the house. Please. And the Egyptian steward of the house says to them, shalom. calm down. Be at peace. And then he says something so strange. Why would this Egyptian steward say this to these Hebrews? Your God. Your God. Essentially saying, your God is taking care of you. It's an amazing thing that God is using this Egyptian steward of Joseph's house to comfort the hearts of these Hebrews who should know about their God, who should have confidence in their God, who should have trust in their God. And God in his providence is using this unbeliever, essentially, to witness to them about their God. He says, be at rest. Your God is trustworthy. He's put treasure in your sacks. He's taken care of you. We have the money we need. We got paid by you. Don't worry. You're okay. Amazing. Amazing. Are you ever in that situation sometimes where you're in a hard situation and an unbeliever somehow says something so mysterious to you? Like in a moment that you should be trusting God, but you're a wreck and they're okay. And like you're the believer and they're not. You know, one pastor illustrates it this way. You know, you're on a plane. You're a believer. You know where your eternal destiny lies. There's an unbeliever sitting next to you. And there's some heavy turbulence happening. And you're getting freaked out. You're getting nervous. You're going nuts. And you're praying, oh, Lord. You know, when turbulence happens when we're on the plane, my wife says, Jesus! she doesn't care. She starts singing. She goes nuts. But it's awesome. But you're sitting there and you're freaked out. And then there's this guy sitting next to you who doesn't know the Lord at all. And he's like, it's going to be okay. That's kind of like what's happening here. These guys who should know their God, they're freaking out, and he comes, this guy. Amazing how God works. And he says, peace to you. Peace to you. Now notice verses 26 to 31. When Joseph came home, they brought into the house to him the present that they had with them and bowed down to the ground to worship him. Don't miss now the fulfillment here of Joseph's dreams from 20 years ago. Now all the brothers are here. It's not just 10 brothers bowing down like we saw before. All of them are here. It's 11 brothers. Simeon has been released. We just saw that. Verse 27, and he inquired about their welfare and said, is your father well? The old man of whom you spoke, is he still alive? Joseph wants to know. They said, your servant, our father, is well. He is still alive. Notice now. And they bowed their heads and prostrated themselves again. Notice the fulfillment. When God has a purpose, it never fails. When God has a plan, it never fails. This is what Joseph dreamed about 20 years ago. And he lifted up his eyes and he saw his brother Benjamin, his mother's son, and said, is this your younger brother of whom you spoke to me? And then without even giving them a chance to respond, he says, God be gracious to you, my son. Then Joseph hurried out, for his compassion grew warm for his brother. And he sought a place to weep. And he entered his chamber and he wept there. Then he washed his face and came out. And controlling himself, he said, serve the food. Now, how would you feel if you see someone you deeply love after being separated for over 20 years? How would you feel if in addition to this you know that just before you were separated you weren't on good terms? Something went wrong. They wronged you or you wronged them. And then all of a sudden you're taken away and it's been 20 years and you haven't seen this person you love, these people you love. This is the situation Joseph's in. Why is he weeping? Why is he crying? Because Joseph, after all of his pain and hardship and difficulty, is now looking at his brothers, and he tested them to know, I wonder if Benjamin's okay. He's okay. Here he is now. And Joseph, the Bible says he couldn't control himself. He left and began to cry. I think I'd do that. You'd probably do that if you were separated from someone you loved for years and years and years. And there they are before you. And Joseph feels immense compassion. So much so that he left the room and began to weep. He wants to reveal himself here. He wants to be reconciled, but it's not time yet. It's not time yet. Loved ones, God has cornered Jacob.
forcing him to send Benjamin with his brothers, compelling him to trust him. And one of the main things we need to see here in Genesis 43 is that God is changing Jacob. And God is changing the brothers. And this has huge redemptive implications. But before we go on to the next point, I want to ask you this question one last time. Has God cornered you today? Are you cornered where you have no other option but to trust him? Let's be a church of people who understand who it is we worship and serve. Let's be a group of people who don't have to be reminded by people who don't know our God that he is worthy and trustworthy. That we don't have to be afraid. He is our peace, just like the brothers experienced peace. In providence, God will corner us. We must learn to trust. The secondly and final thought is this. In providence, God will transform us. But we all need change. We all need change. Notice chapter 43, verse 33. There's something interesting here I want to show you. And they sat down before him, the firstborn according to his birthright, and the youngest according to his youth. And the men looked at one another in amazement. Here they are now in the palace, and they're about to be served this amazing meal. Verse 34, portions were taken to them from Joseph's table, but Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as any of theirs. Okay, let's stop for a moment and consider this. We don't want to go over this too quickly. What's going on here? This is interesting. Why was Benjamin given 5 times as much as the rest? Is Joseph playing favorites with Benjamin here? That's not the reason. The reality is that while Joseph longs to be reconciled to his brothers, he's still very interested to test, have they changed? And what's happening here is Joseph is reconstructing a scenario. You remember 20 years ago, Joseph was the favored one. He was given a robe of many colors. And when he was favored, the brothers hated him. The brothers were jealous of him. The brothers could not imagine that their father would favor another brother in this way. Now, Joseph continues to test them. He's reconstructing the scenario. Let me just sit them all down. I'll give them all something to eat. And let me just see what happens when I give Benjamin some special treatment here. I'm going to give Benjamin 5 times as much. And when Benjamin is served, you better believe Joseph's watching his brothers. He's watching their response. Are they going to be nudging each other? Why does that guy get more? Are they going to be pushing each other around? Like what's that all about? Are they going to be getting jealous inside? Joseph is reconstructing a scenario here because he wants to test, have these men who need to be changed really been changed? Or are they the same guys that when I was favored 20 years ago went as far as to want to kill me? So Joseph is looking at them one by one. Are they okay? How are they going to respond to this? They passed the test. It says, but Benjamin's portion was 5 times as much as any of theirs, and they drank and were merry with him. Right, that says that they were good. Everyone's getting served, and they're in a posture of increased trust in the Lord and peace in their hearts. And Benjamin gets 5 times as more as them, and nobody's saying anything about it. And they were all merry and drank with him. God is changing these brothers. God is redeeming this family that's so important to his redemptive purpose of salvation. God is changing them. He's redeeming them. His purpose for them will prevail. Then the text says he commanded the steward of the house, this is interesting, fill the men's sacks with food, as much as they can carry, and put each man's money in the mouth of his sack. So he does it again. Gives them provision for the road, puts their money back in their sack. Verse 2 now. And put my cup, the silver cup, in the mouth of the sack of the youngest, with his money for the grain. Verse 4. They had gone only a short distance from the city. Now Joseph said to his steward, up after the men, follow them. And when you overtake them, say to them, why have you repaid evil for good? Is it not from this that the Lord drinks? You have done evil doing this. When he overtook them, he spoke them these words. He said to them, why does my Lord speak to these words? Far be it from your servants to do such a thing. So he tests them about the favoritism, sends them on their way, but there's another test. You think all is good. They're walking out, and they're full, they're happy, they got food to take back to their family. Everyone's okay. Benjamin's with them, Simeon's with them. Everything seems to be good. Joseph says, one more thing. Put my silver cup in their sack. He's planting it. Another plan, another plot to test them. Put my silver cup in the sack. We go down now. Verse 17. Excuse me, up a little further. So he planted it. Now verse 10. He said, he who is found with it shall be my servant. This is Joseph saying this to them. He who is found with it shall be my servant, and the rest of you shall be innocent. Then each man quickly lowered his sack to the ground. Each man opened his sack, and when he searched, beginning with the eldest and ending with the youngest, and the cup was found in Benjamin's sack. Then they tore their clothes, and every man loaded his donkey, and they returned to the city. When Judah and his brothers came to Joseph's house, he was still there. They fell before him to the ground. Joseph said to them, what is this deed that you have done? Do you not know that a man like me can indeed practice divination? And Judah said, what shall we say to my Lord? What shall we speak? They're innocent. How can we clear ourselves? God has found out the guilt of your servants. Behold, we are now my Lord's servants. Both we and he also, in whose hand the cup has been found. Notice that Judah doesn't blame shift. This is important. He doesn't sell out Benjamin. He's coming collectively now, bearing the blame for all of this. Then Judah went up to him and said, O my Lord, please let your servant speak a word in my Lord's ears. Verses 19 to 29, Judah begins to plead with Joseph, explaining how dear Benjamin is to his father, because you see, Joseph says, the one who has the cup, I'm going to take him, I'm going to imprison him. Judah begins to plead with him, beg him not to keep Benjamin, because Benjamin is so dear to his father. Verse 30 then, now therefore, as soon as I come to your servant, my father, and the boy is not with us, then, as his life is bound up with the boy, as soon as he sees that the boy is not with us, he will die. Okay, so just understand what's happening here. Joseph says, I want to keep in custody only the one that has the silver cup in his sack. Judah doesn't want to let this happen. He says, no, we'll all stay as your servants. I can't go back without Benjamin. If I go back without Benjamin, my father is going to die. My father loves Benjamin so much. This is what he's saying. Judah's changing. Verse 30. Now therefore, as soon as I come to your servant, and the boy's not with us, his life is bound up in the boy's life. As soon as he sees that the boy's not with us, he will die. Verse 33 now. Now therefore, watch this. Please let your servant remain instead of the boy as a servant to my Lord. And let the boy go back with his brothers. For how can I go back to my father if the boy is not with me? I fear to see the evil that my father would find. So Judah says then, take me instead of Benjamin. Take me. He says, just let Benjamin go back. If my father sees that Benjamin is not with us, he's going to die. Take me instead of Benjamin. Do you think there's been a change in Judah? Do you think there's been transformation in Judah? In Genesis 37, it was Judah's bright idea to sell Joseph into slavery. In Genesis 44, it's Judah's idea to take the place of his brother Benjamin as a slave. In Genesis 38, we see the blunders, failures, and sinfulness of Judah. In Genesis 44, we see Judah emerging as a righteous leader among the brothers. In Genesis 49, Judah is the chosen seed whose line will produce humanity's substitute, Jesus Christ. In Genesis 44, Judah himself acts as Benjamin's substitute, foreshadowing the substitution of Jesus Christ. Loved ones, God has been providentially using the wicked intentions of these brothers in order to bring about redemption and his redemptive purposes, in order to bring about transformation in the lives of these brothers, in order to bring about salvation to these very brothers. And if you can just take a step back and begin to realize that this is exactly what God wants to do in our hearts today. He uses all the wicked intentions of man to accomplish a great purpose for you and for me and for the redemption of the world. He uses the wicked intentions, the hard things that happen in our lives. He uses it all if we would just trust him and believe that he's using it all to bring about a good outcome in our lives, because he's in the business of transforming us, and he's progressively sanctifying us, and he is in the business of redeeming us. And some of us need to believe again in a fresh way in the sovereignty and providence of God. God's purposes are advancing. No matter how rocky the road is, no matter how bleak the situation seems, God is working in this family. He's transforming them. He's bringing them to the place they need to be. He's bringing Judah from utter failure to the emerging leader, because Judah is the chosen seed. He's doing the same for us, loved ones. He's working in the hardships of our lives and the difficulties. We've been saying this from the beginning of the series. Don't let these words land on dead ears and dead hearts. He's doing things in your life. He will corner you to allow you to trust him, to believe in his providential purposes for you. That he loves you no matter how dark it gets, no matter how hard it gets. He always has a plan. So let's be reminded of his amazing providence in this story. And let's be gripped by his amazing sovereignty and providence in this story. We have to remember this. If Joseph wasn't tossed into the pit, he would have never been sold as a slave. If Joseph was never sold as a slave, he would have never entered Potiphar's house. If he had never entered Potiphar's house, he would have never been falsely accused by Potiphar's wife. If Joseph was never falsely accused by Potiphar's wife, he would have never been imprisoned with the cupbearer and the baker. If Joseph was never imprisoned with the cupbearer and the baker, the Pharaoh would have never heard of him at the time of his disturbing dreams. If the Pharaoh never heard of him at the time of his disturbing dreams, then he would have never received the interpretation of his dreams. And if Pharaoh never received the interpretation of his dreams, he would have never had a strategy for overcoming the famine. And if Pharaoh never had a strategy for overcoming the famine, the people of Egypt and Canaan and Jacob's family would have all starved to death. And if Jacob's family starves to death, loved ones, the redemptive purposes of God through the chosen seed Judah would have been destroyed. And if the chosen seed Judah is destroyed, the purpose of God to save the world through Jesus Christ is destroyed. And if the purpose of God to save the world through Jesus Christ is destroyed, you and I won't be sitting here today. You and I will have no hope. You and I will be on our way to eternity apart from Jesus Christ in hell. You need to look at the story of Joseph. You need to look at the providence and the sovereignty, and you need to let it give you hope, because in your life things are unfolding. And at certain seasons you feel locked up in prison. At other seasons you feel like you're exalted, but you don't know why. At other seasons you feel like you're being betrayed and hated. There's all kinds of things happening, loved ones. But the way the story of Joseph gives us hope is if we can get our hearts and minds around the doctrine of sovereignty and providence. God's eyes are on you. God's heart and affections are set towards you. God will not let anything happen to you that is outside his good plan for you and for this world. And he is working all things together for your good. Now you sit here and you're going through a hardship. This is where the rubber meets the road. Will you trust him? Will you trust him? This is where the rubber meets the road, because I've been in your chair sometimes. I've heard a sermon like this. I've had the doctrines brought to my mind. But the obedience that I'm called to, the trust I'm called to place in it, it's just too hard for me. It's going to involve loss. It's going to involve pain. Maybe it's going to involve a life of great sacrifice in ways you never imagined. Here's the question. Do you trust God? Will you trust him in the corner you're in? And will you believe and embrace the truth that he is transforming you, and he is redeeming you, and he is changing you? God is changing the patriarch's family. He's changing them all. And his purpose will prevail, and they will be in Egypt. And God's purpose will advance. And the line that will lead to Messiah will survive and will thrive. So that we can sit here today and be confronted with this message. What about you? Will you trust him today? I want you to bow your heads right now. I'm going to ask the worship team to come.